Coup by Widania. Coup. Queen Chrysalis alighted on the highest balcony in Canterlot and surreptitiously peered through the glass doors. Inside was Princess Celestia's bedchamber, and upon a sprawling mattress the oh-so-holy ruler of Equestria slept soundly, her silken bedsheets slipping off of her long flanks. Chrysalis hissed softly, and inspected the doors. They were fastened with an enchanted lock, a delicate tangle of magical threads, that needed to be unraveled, in order to release. She crouched in front of the door and gently probed the lock with her magic. Her invasion of Canterlot had failed. Her attempts to abduct and replace the princess champions had failed. It was time for a much more direct approach, assassination. But it was critical that she herself replaced Celestia. No conjuration or minion can be trusted to pose as the princess. There were too many layers of protection on the land of Equestria. Between the four princesses and their friends, there would always be somebody who would thwart her plans. No, tonight she needed to replace Celestia without a single soul noticing, and then she would have all the time in the world to spread her roots into the kingdom from its very core. With no hive to feed, perhaps she would just pose as Celestia indefinitely. She would have all the love she could ever consume. That would surely be worth the effort of pretending to love these ponies in return. The enchanted lock silently fell apart like a bootlace unraveling, and with the greatest caution, Chrysalis opened the balcony door, and slipped into the bedroom. Celestia did not stir. The queen moved to the end of the bed and spread her hooves into a power stance, aiming her jagged horn at the sleeping alicorn directly ahead. She had one chance at this, a single blast, that would leave no chance of retaliation. Closing her eyes, she steadied her breath, channeling her magic into a uniform flow that began to build up in her spine, moving up to her head and horn. A muffled clatter of a door closing somewhere outside the room made her jump, and her magic faded again. This was too risky. A magical blast this strong would never go unnoticed, if there were staff or guards elsewhere in this tower. But if she restrained herself, Celestia might survive to fight back. Chrysalis racked her brain to think of a solution to this problem. How could she dispatch the most powerful alicorn in Equestria silently and without contest? A devious smile pulled the corners of the queen's mouth. If she devoured Celestia whole, the princess would be dispatched without a body to hide, meaning that even if somebody came looking, Chrysalis could immediately impersonate her, and with such a large meal of love, her powers would be amplified, should any further action be required. But how could she keep Celestia from defending herself? Chrysalis doubted that she was such a sound sleeper as to not notice herself being swallowed. The smile grew as Chrysalis formed the threads of her hypnotizing magic, that she had once used on shining armor. Softer this time, brute force had failed her in the Crystal Empire, now she would use a different tact. She wove the threads into a dream for Celestia. Celestia dreamed of her warm bedroom, left in peace and quiet with a good book and cake to rival it. Her ears twitched, and she turned in shock, to see the changeling queen, Chrysalis, bursting through her balcony doors. The dark invader rushed at her, but Celestia was quicker, and dodged around to her side, wrapping her forelegs around the queen's neck, and arresting her charge. Without even thinking about what she was doing, Celestia opened her mouth wide, as if the last slice of cake was about to expire, and plunged over Chrysalis' head. Strangely, she felt the warm, slick embrace as if it were upon her own head, but in her sleep-addled mind, this only confirmed that her plan was working. She had to devour the rest of the wicked Queen Chrysalis, and rid the world of her once and for all. As she pressed on, the feeling of warm compression spread, throat stretching, soft fleshy walls slipping down shoulders, movement becoming restricted. Chrysalis swirled her unnaturally long tongue around the base of Celestia's neck, filling her pulse as her head bulged out in the queen's own neck. So far so good. Celestia didn't suspect a thing, and the muffled gulping and slurping noises did not carry outside the room. Chrysalis pushed another wave into her mind-controlling spell, pretending to be in distress at the idea of succumbing to the princess, despite the reality being quite the opposite. She worked down to Celestia's chest, the warmth and loving energy that radiated out from her prey now soaking directly into her own body. She couldn't help but utter a moan of delight as she felt the magic spread throughout her, like rich, velvety sauce on her taste buds. Princess Celestia stretched her jaws wide, and pushed down the smooth chitinous barrel of Chrysalis' chest. She could feel the warm grip of her body on the queen, the pulsing of her esophagus and the vibrations of her moans, almost too well. It was strange, she didn't feel any kind of expansion or strain on her own body, just the effects she was having on Chrysalis. It couldn't be right, but her eyes saw clearly, and she had now engulfed most of her nemesis, with the soft pudge of the queen's belly nothing but a bulge in her strong white neck. She didn't know what it should feel like to devour a pony, and this certainly felt nice, so why not keep going? Yes, thought Chrysalis to herself as her jaws began the not unsubstantial mountain of Celestia's round alabaster hips. Everything is fine, Celestia. You're winning, and in your dream you feel nothing but pleasure. You will never know the truth of your demise. Even as you melt into mush within my gut, you'll believe that you've won, and your determination will fuel my magic far beyond anything else. Your mind and body are mine, and so will be the hearts and minds of your subjects, not by my subjugation, but their own free will. Despite being a large, powerful changeling queen, sucking and gulping on the huge rump of Celestia made Chrysalis feel small for the first time in eons, but she knew well enough that her chitinous belly could handle the load. She just had to get past the center of gravity, and the hard work would be over. She closed her eyes in determination, keeping herself steady to maintain her spell and her balance at the same time, and then with one more swallow the juicy hips of Princess Celestia slipped down the stretchy tube of her throat under their own weight, and Chrysalis felt her insides turn over as her huge meal pushed them aside on its way down. Deep in the pulsating belly of the changeling queen, Celestia remained in a hypnotized stupor. In her mind, she had gulped down Chrysalis, hind hooves and all, and the villain was now packed into her swollen belly. The sensation was so vivid she could imagine the warm gooey comfort she had bestowed onto her nemesis. A burp escaped her mouth and her stomach and throat tightened up like a tote bag closing up, wrapping around her prey in a plush embrace. She'd never have to worry about Chrysalis attacking again now. The queen would soon be imprisoned as an extra inch around her ear for the rest of eternity. Maybe the time spent there would even instill compassion into the stubborn changeling. Chrysalis slowly let her breath out in a long sigh of pleasure, resisting the urge to groan aloud. She had silently devoured Princess Celestia. The Alicorn monarch was none the wiser, and neither was anyone else in the castle. The bloated changeling queen flopped on the huge bed, assessing herself. Her slender, jagged legs were stretched out before her, framing a huge round belly that slowly writhed, its contents gently moving and shifting with induced pleasure. The consumed pony inside was radiating love like a hot coal from the fireplace, with all of the energy being absorbed directly into the queen's curvy body. Even after the effort she'd needed to get to this bedroom unseen, and the effort it had taken to swallow a huge alicorn whole, Chrysalis could feel a wellspring of magic bubbling in her core, powered by her rival, and with no sign of depleting anytime soon. Mimicking her prey would be a piece of cake now. The queen's eyes flashed green, and with luxurious ease, the fiery changeling magic spread across her body. The ebony arch of her back gave way to flowing white curves that ended in the big round hips of Celestia, emblazoned with her cutie mark, while her limbs filled out from their slender, perforated look into long and stocky alicorn legs. Her gorgeous shimmering belly was covered by a sea of ivory. It was almost a shame to cover up the trapped pony inside, but at least there was no chance for anyone to see her prey now. The ensemble was finished with Celestia's distinctive flowing mane, complete with special effects. Not a bad look, if I do say so myself, she remarked aloud in Celestia's regal tones. It's a shame to cover my usual glory, but at least I can take the next highest form there is, and this body certainly carries the extra padding well. Despite this observation, she wouldn't exactly pass as had a big dinner. Better to redirect the guards now than arouse suspicion, she thought, before heaving herself up off the bed. The mattress springs creaked as the combined weight of two big ponies was lifted away, and Chrysalis took to her pearlescent hooves. Her belly bounced slightly under the weight of the trapped princess inside, making the disguised changeling shiver with involuntary delight. Her gut was off the ground, but it was still a sight to behold. The change of orientation stirred the sleeping princess inside, and bumps appeared on the surface where she probed her surroundings in confusion. Celestia felt immensely hot, and flustered after swallowing her changeling assailant, or so she thought, but had gotten tangled up in her bedsheets. She managed to right herself, but was well and truly buried by the duvet. She struggled a little, but then opted to give up, since she was only making herself even hotter. The pleasure she felt from her gut was too good to get up for, even if she was overheating. It must have been an emphatic effect, but she still felt the clutch of her belly, as if it was herself inside, rather than Queen Chrysalis. For a moment she was almost envious, but the strange sensation of feeling what her would-be assassin felt was close enough to the real thing. "Guard," called Chrysalis. It was always disconcerting to hear someone else's voice come out of her mouth, when she hadn't disguised herself in some time. Better get used to it, she thought. I'm in this form for the long haul. Your High. The guard appeared at the landing outside Celestia's bedroom, and stopped halfway through his greeting as he saw the princess in all her immense stature. Princess Celestia was a big mare on a normal day, but now the barrel of her chest looked big enough to have another Princess Celestia inside. "Yes indeed," said Chrysalis, enjoying the obviously male star of the guard as he googled who he thought to be Princess Celestia. "I was attacked, by Queen Chrysalis, no less, but I managed to overpower her and devour her. Trapped in my belly, she will no longer pose a threat. Please fetch assistance though. We should perform a binding spell to ensure that she cannot escape." "Yes, your majesty," stammered the guard, and with another sideways glance, he stumbled down the spiral staircase to alert a unicorn guard. 10 minutes later a half-dozen guards, probably most of the current shift in the castle, were queued up around the staircase to see what was going on. They were followed up by Princess Luna, who was theoretically in charge at this point of the day. "But dear sister, what will you do next? You can't possibly conduct your royal duties as encumbered as you currently are," she was saying. "Don't worry," replied Chrysalis, her confidence growing now that not even Celestia's own sister had detected her deception. Doubtless, the aura of having the real Celestia inside her was aiding to mask her disguise. "The changeling queen will be absorbed and imprisoned within my body indefinitely. She cannot threaten us anymore. As the old saying goes, it is better to keep the start spiders where you can see them, and if there is any danger of her escape, I will be the first to know." "There must be a better way," insisted Luna. "If there were, I would propose it. As things stand, I will be encumbered for some time. You will need to raise the sun for me, sister. I trust only you with such a responsibility. I know you can do it." Luna was caught off guard by this proposal, and Chrysalis' clever diversion hit its mark. "Well, if you are sure, we will perform the binding rites. Be sure to alert us if you are in any discomfort from her presence within you, as you will not be able to break this seal on your own. Magi, you may begin." Princess Luna stepped back, allowed 2 unicorn guards in robes to stand either side of the fake Celestia, and focused their magical energy onto her swaying belly. Curled up inside her own imposter, the real Celestia slumbered, still locked into Chrysalis' hypnotizing spell. Her body was enveloped in the glow of unicorn magic that wrapped around her, before drawing tight against her form like a silken sheet, binding her into her fleshy prison. Suspended in supreme comfort, the digestive fluids of Chrysalis' stomach were beginning to soak into her now, and she would dream on, bathed in pleasure, believing that this blissful sensation of warm embrace was her own bestowment on Queen Chrysalis. "Thank you. Now if I may, the evening has left me quite exhausted. I would dearly like to rest." Luna nodded in agreement, and waved the guards out of the room, before following them herself. Chrysalis lifted her ivory hoof, and pressed deep against the soft bulge of her belly, feeling the outline of Celestia sealed inside. "After everything we've been through, who could have dreamed that it would end this way? Don't you agree, Celestia?" She laughed Celestia's musical laugh, and lay down atop her belly, a better comfort even than the royal bed. "I do so wish I could look you in the eye, and tell you that I've won. This fate of yours seems far too good in return for the strife you brought me, but I'm not petty. Knowing what I've done every morning when I wake, is good enough for me. I'd say goodbye, but we've many a moon before we truly part ways, you and I, so instead I'll merely say, good night Celestia, sleep tight." Reduced to nothing more than a reservoir of perpetual love for Chrysalis now, Celestia would melt into a love-oozing putty, and slowly be absorbed and distributed across the queen's mimic of her body, where she would continually be trapped in a dream of swallowing and digesting her captor. It would be months, perhaps years, before she was depleted to the point of no longer being part of the physical world anymore. By that time, everyone, even Princess Luna, will have forgotten about Chrysalis, and believe without question that Celestia was still with them. Bonus content, good end. Celestia slept soundly in the luxurious bed, safe and comfortable. Except for a nagging feeling that formed a frown on her face, a notion or sensation of great energy very close by, as if there was a light in the room piercing her closed eyelids. She slowly opened her eyes, homing in on the source of the disturbance, and in a moment of pure disbelief she saw none other than Chrysalis, the deposed changeling queen, standing at the foot of her bed, shimmering with crackling green energy. Celestia threw her head to one side, and felt the radiant heat of Chrysalis' energy blast strike the pillow behind her, vaporizing it with a muffled thwop that peppered her neck with fragments of cotton and feather. There was no time to think, no time to gather her own magic. With blind adrenaline she stumbled out of her bed, dragging most of the quilt to the floor, and barreled toward the invader with her head down and weight forward. Chrysalis' horn relit, but she was ill-prepared to deal with such an aggressive counterattack, and Celestia crashed into her shoulder, tackling her to the ground in a jumbled pile of limbs and tails and wings. The big princess was more than capable of going hoof to hoof with Chrysalis in a battle of magic, but in such close quarters she had another advantage, her weight. Celestia was no spring lamb. Her padded hips and cake-rounded belly bore down on the changeling, pinning her to the floor under more than 400 pounds of white alicorn muscle and chub. What is the meaning of this? She thundered at Chrysalis, holding her horn against the floor with one hoof. What does it look like, you mule? Retorted Chrysalis. I'm assassinating you. Celestia pursed her lips at this rather obvious answer, shifting her weight to smother the changeling's squirms of attempted escape. She should have called for the guard, and let them drag the disgraced queen away in chains and magical bonds, but her blood was raging from both her abrupt awakening, and the exhaustion of being under threat from the same villain again. She felt the telltale touch of Daybreaker in her soul. Enough of this, she muttered in a voice of steel. There is no court for you in this land, no prison or exile that will mend your ways. If you insist on villainous behavior, then that is exactly what I shall bestow upon you. With this ominous threat, Celestia pulled Chrysalis' head and neck up, so that they were facing one another, although the changeling's lower body was still pinned flat under the bigger alicorn, and Celestia opened her mouth, yawning over Chrysalis' face, stretching impossibly wide. Was it the glint of a glowing ember in the fireplace? Or had Chrysalis seen a faint light in the pulsating throat of Celestia? Her eyes were wide in shock as the princess plunged her mouth over the startled intruder, taking in the entire head in one decisive gulp. Chrysalis jerked and struggled, but Celestia's iron grip was simply too much for her to pry free from, and before she could gather her wits to think of a magical escape, the furious princess had forced the former queen to shoulders into her maw, pinning four hooves into place. The inside of Celestia's esophagus was stiflingly hot. It compressed around Chrysalis' head, and stifled her senses, her muffled screeches of protest being heard only as muted nonsense by the princess. How had her plan gone awry so fast and so badly? She hadn't simply been uncovered this time. She was in the grip of an unyielding trap from which there would be no escape, no bargaining, and potentially no return. Celestia could sense the radiating panic from the wretched queen, lodged halfway into her body. Her trembling body twitched and twisted as she realized that her final demise had well and truly arrived. But Celestia was anything but sympathetic. She gave a satisfied gulp, her mouth taking in the changeling's belly, and lavishing hot saliva across it. It felt good to dish out righteous punishment without the interference of justice in due course. This would be the last time the evil despot would threaten the peace and security of Equestria. She pressed her body down over her squirming prey, filling Chrysalis' head squeeze into her stomach, and ebony hips were enveloped by white cheeks, and Celestia demonstrated her impressive strength once again, by hoisting her meal up into the air, and giving one enormous gulp that sent Chrysalis' lower body slipping down into the alicorn's belly. If Chrysalis had found Celestia's throat unpleasantly warm, it was nothing compared to her belly. A veritable sauna of faintly glowing slime bubbled around her curled-up body, and as her stringy tail flapped on top of her, the princess's throat closed firmly, and locked her into a furnace from which there was no escape. Celestia stood up proudly, standing tall and looking slyly back at her sweeping curves and now engorged belly. It wobbled and writhed with its stricken occupant trapped inside, stuck in a melting pot, that eagerly accepted its feast. Goodbye, Chrysalis, just wait for your body to get used to the heat, and perhaps you can drive one last pleasure as you melt into soup, and earn a permanent prison on my hips. For what it's worth, you'll find the royal throne is quite comfortable. It's what you wanted, is it not?
That's all, Zipsters! Like and subscribe.